Phantom Blade Zero is an upcoming PS5 and PC game developed by S-Game. This game blends Chinese wuxia storytelling with fast cinematic combat in what the studio calls a kung fu punk world. The player controls Soul, an elite assassin who is framed for the murder of his master and left hunted by his own organization. The game's central hook is that Soul has only 66 days left to live, forcing him to uncover the truth behind the conspiracy before time runs out. This premise immediately creates narrative tension because the story is not just about survival, but more so about what a person chooses to do when their remaining time becomes measurable. Now, I think this is a genius premise to create a game upon because you aren't just facing traditional antagonists and people that you have to fight, monsters, organizations, governments even, whatever it may have you, but time itself becomes an antagonistic force in the game. You're battling the very fact that you have a finite amount of time left to draw breath on the planet. So you need to find out who set you up, find out what became of you, and progress and move accordingly. So that just adds this sense of urgency to the game and to you as the player as you're trying to progress and acquire power-ups, acquire items. I'm not sure how their specific mechanics are going to work yet, but that just adds that layer of urgency and you need to get things done. You aren't just fighting enemies and bosses, you're literally fighting your own mortality. So the fact that us as human beings, we require things like rest, sleep in and of itself becomes an enemy because you can't afford to waste any time. And in doing that, this allows that every action that you take, it just has that much more weight because you just can't afford wasted effort. Now, this game is currently set to release on September 9th of this year for PlayStation 5 and PC. Recent reports indicate the game is in the final stages of development, with S-Game emphasizing polish and handcrafted artistry, which is what you would expect and want to see the developer do when they're approaching that release date. Community reactions online have been overwhelmingly positive, with many players praising the game's combat fluidity, visual style, and its unique identity outside the traditional Souls-like formula. This combat is very ambitious, as you can see here. They're trying to attempt and do things of which we have never seen in a game before, at least one that I've never seen. So I think that just adds a sense of newness, and a lot of people are excited for this release. And in a year that's already packed with major releases, Phantom Blade Zero continues to stand out because it feels distinct rather than derivative from something else. And personally, this is why I think this belongs in everyone's, or at least a lot of people who like RPGs or Souls-like type of games. This is all the more reason why this should belong in your games to look out for in 2026. And this year is just absolutely stacked, but this one feels like few games usually do because it seems to have its own identity, just the combat alone. And I also like just the added layer of haste that it gives the player in terms of gameplay by adding this 66 days, that finite amount of time left to live. That's an interesting concept. So I'm sure the narrative is going to be very good as well. This doesn't just look good, it looks focused. It feels focused, like they know exactly what they want to do with this game, like they know what message they want to portray, what gameplay mechanics they want to instill into it. And this is apparent by them still maintaining that on-track release for September of this year. The long wait may actually be well worth the hype. Now, obviously, I have no idea as to what the actual nuanced specific mechanics are for the game in terms of the gameplay, but what we can assume just simply based off of this trailer is that the combat emphasizes fast chain attacks, parries, stance transitions, cinematic counters. You got weapon variety. It gives it the rhythm of a martial arts film rather than a slower, methodical Souls game. The multiple trailers have showcased highly reactive swordplay, close quarters weapon clashes, fluid dodging, and fast traversal through layered environments. The game appears to reward precision and momentum, and in doing that, meaning hesitation could be just as dangerous as overcommitting. So you not acting in the boss fight or in the fight in general, that could be just as dangerous as you excessively dodging, excessively rolling, excessively attacking. They can have equally detrimental effects. So I think that's an interesting mechanic. At least this is what I surmise about the game. The progression systems also, they appear to be tied towards the weapons and lore discovery and player mastery rather than raw stat grinding, which is why I alluded to earlier why I think the narrative is going to be very good. And you also see this reflective in Souls games where it's not simply about raw grinding those stats and trying to level up your character, but it's more so about learning about the world building, the lore, the story, what actually happened. You find out a lot about this stuff, especially in these types of games. You find out a lot about it when it comes to finding out the dialogue through the NPCs, through the weapons, in Souls games, things of that nature. And I think this is moderately reflective of that, but this seems to be charting its own distinct path. So the combat, it looks like controlled chaos, so to speak, where it's fast enough to feel stylish, but it's deliberate enough to stay intense. And that exact concept is exactly what can make that sense of urgency. It makes it feel mechanical, like a game element, a part of the game, rather than just it being a part of the narrative in the story. So the fast decision making that you inevitably encounter playing Soul in this game, I think that's by design. It's meant to mirror the story's limited time concept. That's 66 days left to live. That's why you have to make decisions on the fly. I, for one, would not be surprised if this is a game that has multiple or at least a couple different endings simply due to the fact that you have that small window in order to get something done.
What's your plan, knowing you have only 66 days to live?
The inclusion of this measured amount of time transforms the story into an exploration of meaning under pressure. Finite time naturally sharpens priorities because the character can no longer afford indecision. In storytelling, countdowns create momentum by forcing every encounter, alliance, and betrayal to feel consequential, important. And ironically, this is kind of reflective of the real world and in real life. When you feel like as if you're pressed for time, like you don't have much of it in order to make things happen, well, you grow to appreciate that remaining time much more than you would have if you had extended periods of time. This is why you see things like procrastination, especially in younger people, because they just automatically are under this belief like, hey, I can just put it off till later. Hey, I can just do it tomorrow. I don't have to worry about it today because I have time. Whereas if you shrink that amount of time that they have at their disposal, they're far more likely to progress and go about their life in a quickened manner, or in a manner where they have purpose, where they have something that they need to do, where they have substance. There is no time for indecision when you are faced under that sort of pressure. And I think this is why you see a lot of people who live sort of vicariously through others, because they may have finite time, they may have infinite time, and they haven't reached that point where they have way more finite time, if that makes sense. Especially when you're younger, you have way more years ahead of you than as if you are older, where you're near the end of the line. And you see people who are kind of just passive in regards to their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, education, any type of goal or venture they want to do, they'll just put it off. And then before you know it, all that put off time that you've let accumulate, you wake up and you're 60, 70, 80 years old and you're like, where did the time go? And I think them including that in this game is sort of an indirect way to address concepts such as that in the real world. Pressure strips away distractions. It deprives you of indecision. When you're trying to accomplish a goal, you're trying to get something done, you don't have time for girls. You don't have time for drinking, for partying, for smoking, for drugs. You're trying to finish a goal. And anything that can take away from that, especially when you're crunched for time, is quite frankly something that you don't have time for. So these dire straits, these dire circumstances, they kind of force you to have clarity and to know in what direction you're going to go, as opposed to just winging it, which is what 90% of people do anyway. So, when tomorrow is not guaranteed, every choice you make, it gains that much more meaning. The same way deadlines push us in real life, Soul's death sentence pushes the narrative forward. And that urgency is what transforms survival into purpose. And truthfully, sometimes purpose doesn't come from having endless possibilities. It comes from knowing the fact that you never had endless time to begin with. Now, 2026 is stacked with desirable titles, but the reason why I believe this game could be one of 2026's best games is because Phantom Blade Zero combines a stylish action, a strong thematic hook, and a visually unique martial arts world that already differentiates itself from its competition. Its strongest asset may be how well its gameplay speed and narrative urgency reinforce each other. Few action games successfully make their story premise and combat philosophy feel like it's one and the same, as if it's the same idea. But this one appears to accomplish that, which is why I think it sets itself apart. And by virtue of them accomplishing that, that's why I'm so excited for it. It feels like one of the rare games, like where the theme, it equals the gameplay. The message you're trying to convey, it's tied into the mechanics of the very game that you're playing. And that time pressure is not just story dressing, it's baked into the game's software and in the game's identity. And that's where it makes it memorable, where it makes it a title where you have high hopes for and something that you really hope it delivers. I remember when I first saw the reveal trailer, people were like, the combat for this is very ambitious. I really hope they deliver on that. And then as we progress and we get more trailers, we get more updates, it seems that it's coming closer into being brought into fruition, especially as that September release date approaches. This might be the action RPG that emotionally sticks with people in 2026, and that says a lot because we have a lot of titles coming out. We got Wolverine, Lords of the Fallen 2 is supposed to drop this year. There's a whole bunch of games that don't even have release dates, specific ones at least, like the new Plague Tale game that's supposed to be coming out. So for this to be able to differentiate itself amongst all these titans and heavy hitting titles, I think that's a feat in and of itself, and it adds all the more reason why people are going to want to play this game, especially me. And so I ask all of you, does playing a game that has a limited time mechanic, does that make it more immersive for you, or is that something that would deter you? Maybe some of you have experienced that hastiness and that rushed time when it comes to other titles like Majora's Mask or Dead Rising, or even in real life deadlines where you're trying to finish a paper for school, or maybe you're a journalist, or maybe you have something you need to do for work. Just that rushed amount of time and that rushed feeling that you feel when it comes to that sense of urgency. Do any of you experience that? I'm Harlem. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.